With the previous discussion, we have discussion with the discussion was moderated by ECRE. ECRE is for the same center, but for the West of Africa. And right now, we have Denise from the East of Africa, ECRE, to moderate this session. And Denis, I would like to give you the floor, and if you want to introduce your session and your panels. Thank you so much. You can give this if they have some presentation.
Yeah, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Denis Sariho from the East African Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, EAIF, which is headquartered in Kampala, Uganda. You are welcome to this session on the private sector, public-private dialogue on renewable energy, rural electrification, business and investment opportunities in East Africa. And I'm the moderator for this session, and I'm going to take this opportunity to invite the panelists to come to the floor. The first one is Eva Indrunaite, the Policy and Partnerships Manager, Camuco Clean Energy. Yeah, you're welcome. The next is Gabriel Davis, Head of Energy Access Cross Boundary. You are welcome. Next is Imen Benamar, Business Development East Africa, Turbulent. Beatrice Wanjiku Njuguna, Manager Administration, Rural Electrification and Renewable Energy Corporation, Kenya. Joan Mutibwa, Coordinator for Rural Electrification Program in Uganda, Ministry of Energy, Uganda. And then lastly is Maria Laxo, Head of Program, REAP. So I'm going to give a presentation about the East African situation, the status for renewable energy in the East African community region. So the East African community is an intergovernmental organization comprising of 7 countries, that is Democratic Republic of Congo, the Republic of Tanzania, Kenya, Burundi, Rwanda, South Sudan, and Uganda. So this region has abundant renewable energy resources, and there is a lot of business opportunities for investment in the East African community. The East African community established an East African Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency called EAIF, and its mandate is to promote renewable energy and energy efficiency in the region. So you can be able to make use of the center to be able to tap into the business opportunities in the East African community. East Africa hosts about 3.6% of the world population, but only accounts about 1.5% of the total global primary energy consumption. And this is according to data from the World Bank. As I already said, there is abundant resources for renewable energy in the region. Hydro resources, solar, wind, biomass, peat. Even some of the countries are on the ocean, so you can also tap into ocean energy. But the challenge that we have is the majority of the people stay in rural areas. Like 78% of the population stay in rural areas, and only about 22% stay in the urban areas. So meaning there is a big opportunity for rural electrification. And the populations you find, actually they are scattered. It's not that since people are in rural areas, one house is in this area, after maybe 300 meters or sometimes a kilometer you get another house. So in such a case, it becomes very hard to extend the grid, the national grid to such areas. So we have observed that a growth in the market for solar systems, especially for solar home systems, and currently the market is also starting for mini grids. In 2019, in the half year of 2019 alone, 2.43 million solar products were sold in the East Africa region, and this is according to GOGRA. Looking at the electricity access in the East African community, Uganda, 57% have access to electricity as of 2021. And that is 19% grid connected and 38% off grid. So you can see already that the market for off grid in Uganda is big. And since we are not yet at 100% electrification, there's still a lot of business opportunity for renewable energy. In Kenya, 75%, that is still as of 2021, and we believe by now the percentage could have increased. And in Rwanda, 61%, 47% grid connected, and 14% off grid. In Burundi, it is 11% electricity access. South Sudan, 7.24%. Tanzania, 40%. Democratic Republic of Congo, 19%. And when we look at the average, is 38.6%. So you can see there is still a lot of opportunity for investors, for development partners to enter the East African market. There is an enabling policy environment for renewable energy in East Africa. Each of the countries have established laws that promote renewable energy. Laws, regulations, policies. For Uganda, there is a renewable energy policy of 2007, energy policy of 2002, but all of these are being reviewed, so there is an energy policy draft of 2022, so which is now even looking at the latest opportunities. There is a connections policy of 2018, running up 2027. The Kenya National Energy Policy of 2018, the Rwanda Energy Policy 2015, for Burundi Vision 2025, South Sudan National Electricity Policy. For Tanzania, there is National Energy Policy of 2015, and also for this there is a law that promoting electricity access. So the market for East Africa is favorable, and I believe that you all have a space. The government, development partners, the private sector all have a space to play in the East African market. Now we're going to go to the next presentation, and this will be made by Beatrice Wanjiku Juguna from Kenya, who will be presenting about the Kenyan situation in as far as renewable energy and rural electrification is concerned. Beatrice, you are welcome.
Thank you so much. It is really great to be in this landmark forum, and I'm going to take you through the Rural Electrification and Renewable Energy Corporation in Nairobi, Kenya. where we champion the rural electrification projects. Thank you. The Rural Electrification and Renewable Corporation, Energy in Kenya, is a corporation that was established in the government of Kenya purposely to subsidize electricity supply in the rural areas. Previously, 30 years ago, that was in the year 1973, the electricity supply in the rural areas of Kenya was only at 4%, and therefore the government realized the need and the desire to establish an organization that would champion and steer the rural electrification in the corporation. And therefore, in the year 2003, in the year 2006, REREC was established. It was established in the year 2006, and currently we have been able to manage the electrification of the country from 4% to 75%. I'll give a background about this corporation in Kenya. The government realized that there was still a dire need and a gap in the renewable energy sector, and therefore they decided to expand the mandate of REA and renamed it to REREC. And therefore the mandate was expanded so it could target the renewable energy aspect in the country, where it targeted facilitation of this energy to the public facilities, this being the markets, the schools, the administrative centers, entrepreneurs, worship centers, and community water projects. Our strategic focus in rural electrification and renewable energy corporation is mainly to ensure that we have a sustainable energy solution for all rural electrification and renewable energy for socio-economic transformation, and ensure that the nation has a green-driven energy country. At REREC, our strategic objectives have been zeroed into 6. As you can see, we promote the use of renewable energy, increase electric connectivity in the rural areas, promote research and development in renewable energy, establish strategic collaboration with the stakeholders, build human and strengthen institutional capacity, achieve financial stability, and these objectives are leveraged on the balanced scorecard approach. At REREC, our key achievements in renewable energy investments in Kenya are many, but we shall zero in on a few. We have the Garissa solar plant. We have the grid-connected renewable energy system, which is the Garissa solar plant that holds a megawatt of 54. And this project is the biggest in East and Central Africa, and currently it is contributing 2% of the national energy mix and has significantly led to a reduction of energy costs in the country, therefore promoting the development of clean, reliable, sustainable, and affordable electricity. The government installed and developed 27 number solar mini grids in the off-grid areas of Kenya, which was financed by the government of Kenya. We have developed several solar wind mini-grids in different parts of Kenya by the private sector, and these are usually licensed by Energy Petroleum Regulatory Authority, EPRA. We have developed 7-number solar mini-grids in selected off-grid areas financed by the World Bank. They are set to be completed by 30th of June 2023. Under the COSAP project, which is the Kenya Off-Grid Access Project, funded by IDA, we have developed 137-number solar mini-grids in selected off-grid areas in the underserved counties of Kenya. Bidding documents have already been prepared for this project. We work together with the private sector in the sale of solar home systems and standalone systems in the country. What are the investment opportunities in Kenya in renewable energy? Development of renewable energy mini-grids and standalone solar systems through public partnership programs, establishment of collaboration partnerships with REREC or other private sector entities, climate change mitigation programs, diversified mini-grid systems, that is wind, hydro, tidal, and solar systems, implementation of biomass and biofuel technology projects, joint research in renewable energy, development of grid-connected renewable systems, and intensified energy center services. Thank you, Asanteni.
Yeah, thank you very much, Beatrice, for the nice presentation and for the great work you are doing in Kenya in the areas of rural electrification and renewable energy. Because in East Africa, Kenya has the highest electrification rate, access rate of at least 75%. So we are going to start our panel discussion, and first of all, you're welcome to the panel. You are all very smart. I would like that you introduce your organization, what you are doing, first of all, what the organization does, and also what you are doing to support the private sector-driven renewable electrification with the decentralized renewables in emerging markets. So I can begin from Mayor, and then we go on to the next.
Thank you. So I'm Maria Laksa, Head of Program for Southern Africa at REAP. REAP is an international NGO based in Vienna, Austria. We have a mandate to accelerate clean energy market development in countries where we are operational. We are one of the key implementation partners for Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa, BGFA, that is implemented by Nordic Environment Finance Corporation, NEFCO, and REAP and NERAS are one of the key implementation partners. So we are focusing on providing incentives to off-grid electrification by the private sector and increasing private investment into energy access in the countries where we are operational. We are operational in 6 countries at the moment, and 126 million euro total fund size. We're funded by several donors, including Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, and Power Africa. And we have just launched a funding window in Uganda, so this is our connection to East Africa at the moment, but we can talk about that more later. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Beatrice?
I thought I just did the presentation. I'm going to repeat myself again. Yeah. All right. As I said in my presentation, I work for the Rural Electrification and Renewable Energy Corporation in Kenya, where our main mandate is to electrify the rural areas of Kenya. We have 47 counties in Kenya, and we have our offices spread in all those counties, and our main role is to ensure that the rural areas, the public facilities are electrified, both in line grid and renewable energy projects. And we partner with also the county government of Kenya, who are 74, in a program we call the Matching Fund, where the counties come in with their funds and we match up the amount and ensure that they also champion the projects in the counties. And basically we have been able to electrify 75% of Kenya from 4% when the corporation was established. And therefore we have worked greatly with the World Bank also, with the Exchequer in Kenya, and we are under the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum in Nairobi. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice. Now we'll go to Gabriel.
Good morning. Can you hear me? So my name is Gabriel Davis. I'm head of Energy Access Across Boundary. So like a lot of people in this room, we are in the business of getting power to people who don't have it. And our business is on the finance side. So we raise infrastructure capital and we invest it into solar mini grids that provide power to businesses and households across Africa. What do I mean by infrastructure capital? Basically, it's long-term, low-cost money that matches the cash flow of infrastructure projects. You know, typically high upfront capex and then a steady, reliable return over 10, 15, 20 years. So typically, you know, historically infrastructure has been things like roads and bridges and 100 megawatt wind farms. And what we spend most of the last few years doing is making mini grids look like bridges and roads and wind farms. So if you ever wonder what does the energy access team across Boundary do every day, I say we spend most of our time trying to make mini grids look like bridges, which is hard because they don't look like bridges. They're not what infrastructure investors typically accept. And so, yeah, we package and structure mini grids so that they look and smell and feel like infrastructure to investors. And a lot of that, which we can talk about later, involves government regulation and support so that they have the same kind of characteristics that a bridge or a road has.
Thank you. Yeva?
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. My name is Yeva. I work for a climate and impact fund manager called CAMCO. So sitting next to Gabriel, we both come from the financing side, although our mandate is perhaps a slightly less focused, and I definitely don't spend all of my days trying to draw bridges from mini-grids, but I'd like to see how you do that. So at CAMCO, we manage currently 2 financing facilities that invest in renewable energy in Africa. One of them is called the Renewable Energy Performance Platform. It's a mouthful. We call it REP. REP finances what we call small-scale decentralized renewables pretty much across sub-Saharan Africa. We have made quite a lot of investments in the East Africa region, and I'll try to maybe mention a few of them. With REP, we don't only invest in off-grid. We can provide financing for off-grid, so SHS, a lot of mini-grids, isolated grids, but also small IPPs. By small, I mean up to 25 megawatts. And in fact, if we talk about opportunities for renewable energy investments in East Africa, we think that that is quite important for building resilience of the grid, for building capacities of smaller developers. And we've made some targeted investments in Burundi and Rwanda, among other countries in that field. In addition to REP, CAMCO also manages another financing platform called Spark. Spark is investing in commercial and industrial, so CNI, renewable energy and energy efficiency, in Kenya and Uganda within this region. Here we also work with local developers and help them grow as companies expand their pipelines while also serving relatively smaller scale CNI, so a lot of companies that are really working at the forefront for economic development in these countries. So that's perhaps for the introduction, and look forward to further discussion.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Now Imen.
Yes, hey, hello. My name is Imen. Unlike my fellow panelists who are representing government or financing, I'm representing the private sector as we are a technology company. So I represent Turbulent in Africa. Turbulent has been founded in 2015. We have offices in Belgium and Rwanda. We design and we build micro hydropower turbines that we place in running riverside, so alongside rivers. Unlike traditional hydropower, we actually work with sites with very low head, so we can place our turbines in sites that have a 2-meter drop already. And that way we basically hope to bridge the gap of giving access to electricity in sites that are not covered by other types of hydro technology. As we have noticed that the biggest, I would say, untapped potential of hydropower lies specifically in these sites that are not met yet today. So we work both on-grid and off-grid, and it's a very scalable solution, whereas for a pilot project, for example, we can start with 1 or 2 turbines, and then when demand grows, we can basically keep on placing several turbines and that way scale to multiple megawatts.
Yeah, thank you, Imen. So which challenges are you facing in the decentralized renewable energy space?
Challenges. Different challenges, of course. I think the biggest challenge will still remain the access to finance, unfortunately. We've seen a lot of ideas that are really driven by communities. They're super standing behind their ideas, really wanting to change the way they deal with electricity locally. But unfortunately having a hard time locally to make it a bankable project. So that's really where a lot of projects get stuck. Within regards of financing, I'd also say, depending on which country we're talking about, but if I take the example of Burundi, with a very limited access to foreign currencies, it's really hard to get, even if you'd get a loan in US dollars, for example, it's really hard for our local partner to engage in such a loan. So I would say the need to have loans in local currencies. Another challenge would be, I'd say, clear legislation and frameworks, but we've seen a lot of positive movement in that side. So I guess that's really becoming more and more positive. But specifically data as well. So for our projects, we also need historical hydraulic data or rainfall data, and that is something we still stumble upon, like the lack, apologies, the lack of having this data available also slows down our projects and basically makes the dimensioning of the turbines also more complicated.
So now, what do you think, how these kind of challenges should be addressed? Which are the opportunities available to address those challenges? And also, how are you working with the local private sector? Like, to be able to scale up your business? Yeah, so basically, so we are, as I said before, we're a technology company. So for each and every project we implement, we work with local project developers. People that know the legislation, that have their local contacts, have their stakeholders, and are able to basically also enable change locally. So I'd say in terms of opportunities, of course, it's often, turning towards governments and seeing in terms of their plans and their agenda how we can fit in their national programs. But I guess in terms of opportunities, I'd have to also look at the governments that are other players sitting here in the panel. I think they basically drive these opportunities as well. Yeah, thank you. So I think we can now look for opportunities from the rest of the panelists. So we can begin from you start, Eva.
I mean, the region is quite diverse, right? The region is quite diverse, so I guess, you know, if we talk about opportunities, we don't have time for that, but it would be worth discussing, you know, every individual country. But in general, I think at CAMCO, we think that there are a lot of opportunities in what we call smaller scale. So we always target not the sort of super large utility scale projects, but we see a lot of potential and a lot of impact as well in working at the smaller range. And I do see some interesting developments happening there. I mean, the economic activity post-COVID, which of course was a hard hit to all countries on the continent, including in East Africa, the economic activity is now picking up, and we can see that at the same time, obviously, also other macroeconomic realities are also increasing prices in some markets, and so for the for the commercial and industrial sector, many people are turning to renewables as actually a solution to secure lower cost and more reliable power. But I'm also seeing some interesting developments, maybe perhaps without going into too much detail, in terms of public-private cooperation for rural electrification or rural development as well. Not only in the traditional, well, I don't know if we can call it traditional, mini-grids haven't been around for that long, but of course in sort of, developing concession contracts and trying to get the private sector to come in the isolated mini-grid development, but also I think some countries in the region are now thinking how they can partner with the private sector in, let's say, management of distribution networks or interconnected sort of decentralized generation, and how utilities can actually partner much more closely with the private sector. So I think I'm quite excited to see some of those developments and some innovation on that front.
Yeah, thank you. So is your fund attractive for private sector? How many private sector companies are coming to apply for your funding?
Many.
Okay.
We've been quite successful, I would say. So with the REP has been operational since around 2015-16, and we have now committed most of the funding that we have. So that probably shows the rate of success. We have made, I don't have specific regional numbers, unfortunately, but we've made overall close to 50 investments in some 17 countries on the continent. And in East Africa, to name just a few, with REP, we financed the first solar IPP project in Burundi. We financed several run-of-river hydro projects, one in Burundi and I think 2 in Rwanda, or about to close on the second one. Mini-grids in Kenya, Rwanda, DRC also belongs here, right? So we also just closed our financing investment in Nuru, so isolated grids in DRC. So there's definitely a lot of investment. In fact, a lot of interest. We're raising what we call REP2, so the second fund, to be able to address that demand. And with Spark as well, seeing it's a newer market, so CNI, renewable energy, and particularly energy efficiency, is something where we feel the market also needs to understand the opportunities first. So we're sort of working on building that understanding as well. But there's definitely a lot of excitement and opportunities there.
Yeah, thank you, Eva. Now, Gabriel, which are the opportunities for decentralized renewable energy in your organization?
Great, so I'll just start with a quick overview of, I think, one of the main challenges we face with mini-grids, and then I'll explain how that leads to how we see the solutions.
Yes.
So I'm just going to go back to the way we view mini-grids as infrastructure, and just to kind of bring it alive, what I mean by that. So our offices are in Nairobi. If any of you have been there recently and you've taken the expressway from the airport, now takes you straight into town in 20-30 minutes. It's classic infrastructure. It's $8 billion, 25 kilometers of expressway, and but our officers look over it, and in the first few months I could see there was maybe like one car every 5 minutes, and in the news they reported that it was below what was forecast in terms of how much people would use it. So they have, so this bridge has consumption risk, exactly the same as mini-grids. After a few months, they had to change the tariff. It was a bit too expensive, so they reduced the cost of using the expressway. So, tariff risk. And then finally, it was financed by Chinese, investment from China, so currency risk. So, some of the, if you're doing mini-grids, you'll recognize those 3 risks. You'll get hammered by investors for consumption risk, tariff risk, FX risk. And I can turn away from my computer and I can look down at an $8 billion project, and they have all of those risks. Those are infrastructure risks. Investors are right to push us on those, but that's why I'm so focused on pushing that mini-grids infrastructure, because many of the risks that we think are mini-grid specific, that's infrastructure. And I think the key, and I'll get now to the solution, I think one of the key reasons why that project will succeed, although it's very, very different to a mini-grid, is that it has a huge amount of government support. And I think that is every successful mini-grid is a public-private partnership. And we've invested in mini-grids where I don't think the government has been fully bought into the idea. We actually invested with REP in Tanzania 3-4 years ago, and I don't think the government was fully bought into private sector mini-grids. And now we're investing in Nigeria. We see great opportunities in, I'll now go to East Africa, in DRC. I'll cheat a bit and include Madagascar, Mozambique, where we see that government buy-in and their view that this is a infrastructure asset that they're going to support, it's going to deliver a public good for their citizens. That's when mini-grids will work, and that's the markets that we're excited about.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriel. So, which are those successful public-private partnership projects that you have funded?
Yeah, so like I said, I think every successful mini-grid is a public-private partnership, whether you realize it or not, because the government is so involved in every stage of the process. So in Nigeria, I think, I'm giving the example of Nigeria where we had success, but I think we are, because we had government buy-in, but I think we're now seeing that in governments like DRC, in Madagascar. We hope soon in Kenya as well. There'll be more, a kind of resurgence of support for mini-grids, but that's the key.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriel. So now we go to Beatrice. Now about the Kenyan situation, where are those opportunities for investors, opportunities for the renewable energy companies in the decentralized renewable energy space? And then you could also tell us which are the successful public-private partnerships in the market.
All right. Thank you so much, Dennis. I want to give a brief overview of Kenya. In Kenya, we have 14 counties that are quite off the grid and under-reserved counties that require electrification. And so far, the country has been able to establish the areas that require the establishment of the mini-grids. One of them would be the mini-grids. And these 14 counties have a population of about 1.5 million people who need this electricity. So in the implementation of the mini-grids would be one area. We also have the standalone solar systems that work very well in those counties. We also have boreholes. So we would look at retrofitting those boreholes with the solar water pumps. That would be one area I would also see as an opportunity in Kenya. We also have the e-mobility, which is a good area to venture into in Kenya. And also we have the commercial and industrial power, that is the C&A. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Beatrice. Now I go to Media. So which are the opportunities for decentralized renewable energy? And also, you could also tell us about any successful public-private partnerships that you have supported. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to be Uganda specific because this is where we're active. So we did a market scoping study looking at the different off-grid sectors in the country, and it's an untypical market for us a little bit in the sense that it already has quite a vibrant standalone solar sector. It has both international players and also smaller local players active, and they're already serving a good amount of customers, but the opportunity still lies in higher capacity systems, more appliances, higher capacity, but also remote areas. So there's lots of districts that are still underserved. We estimated around 5 million households still potential in that sense, roughly. Also, we see that the mini-grid sector is starting to take off. There's a good policy framework, and there's more and more public incentives coming into that sector, including BGFA. And here we have also worked with REA on identifying sites. So some of these sites are under BGFA as an opportunity for funding. There are over 600 mini-grid sites with capacity of 10 to 100 kilowatt and potential for 100,000 households to be connected. So that's one. Productive use of energy is as well something that all standalone and mini-grid companies are really looking into as a potential for higher revenue. It's a little bit more difficult as a market because it's quite tailored and niche sometimes, but also there I think there is still significant opportunity. It just needs some support. So we are also under the PGFA program supporting productive use solutions at the moment. So the new funding window is currently open. It's open until 4th of May. And there is 6.3 million euros available in incentives as a results-based financing scheme. We are focusing on standalone productive use and mini-grids, and we would like to see companies to serve the underserved counties, and we also have some additional incentives and evaluation additions to companies that are really focusing on productive use. So we would like to be able to bring the investment into that space more. So that's a concrete opportunity at the moment. In terms of other public-private cooperation, so we're also, as BGFA, working on supporting the government. So we are encouraging coordination between market stakeholders more widely, so including the local government, donor government, and the private sector. In Zambia, we have implemented something called the Off-Grid Energy Task Force, and we're aiming to implement similar initiatives in all the BGFA countries. But basically, the aim is to try to improve the coordination of all the market supporting measures and give really a chance for private sector insights and alignment along policies and more complementarity for meeting the needs of the markets. And we've seen REAs in BGFA countries start working more and more with the private sector. Also in Zambia, when we started, there wasn't much off-grid energy activity from the private sector at all. So REA was also not intensively engaging with the private sector, but nowadays they are sharing data, they are managing incentive schemes for private sector off-grid electrification. They're also implementing jointly projects, including operations of distribution of mini-grids. So I think these are positive developments we've seen in BGFA countries. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. Are you supporting research and development and local manufacturing for energy products in the country or in other areas where BGFA is operating?
This is not a specific focus. It is we're more focused on companies in early stages of growth and scale. So proven technologies more, and we do support local companies, and we particularly want to see more local companies becoming active, local partnerships. Also, the international ones can leverage a lot more local expertise in their initiatives. So this is also something we are trying to push in the selection process through the evaluation. So this is something we definitely want to see.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Now, Imen, which are the key drivers in the East African renewable energy market at the moment, especially key supply side drivers for the East African renewable energy market at the moment?
Okay. So what we've seen in our projects, and maybe linking back to where we had a difficult time of making projects bankable, there's an aspect in, so basically what the biggest demand drivers, what we've seen in our projects is, of course, when it's about productive use or CNI. One of our projects we've actually explained on Tuesday is our project in Kenya, where we have several, I would say, components to the productive use of the project. So there's cooling systems for agriculture, there is charging batteries for e-mobility, and that is basically ensuring that the entire load, I would say, that we're producing is basically being consumed, which makes the project again interesting from a bankable perspective. Again, within the CNI context, there's also a lot of milling, tea factories that we're in touch with, and I would say a bit more recent, but what we're also seeing in the region is the hospitality sector. So a lot of, I would say, eco-lodges that are now also looking at having fully, I would say, auto-generating renewable energy. So those are, I would say, four or three of the sectors or demand drivers we're really looking at.
Yeah, thank you, Imen. Eva, what do you say about it?
Well, I don't want to repeat everything, but so on productive use, of course, that's a drive. I'm not going to maybe expand much more on that. On the CNI, I think, I've already mentioned that economic activity has been picking up. At the same time, it's, the energy costs have been increasing, and reliability of supply depends on which market, of course, we talk about, but it's not always there. So businesses definitely turn to renewables because they see opportunity there. But perhaps if I can, if the moderator allows me, just to jump back to the public-private partnership question. With me, in my role as a policy manager, this is really at the forefront of what I do, is kind of bridging the gap between the governments and the private sector. And I'm very happy that we're on this panel where this is kind of at the forefront of the topic. There were already some really good sort of aspects mentioned within, how public-private sectors can collaborate for rural electrification, let's say through the design of programs and, everything that goes there. So maybe, and also the policy, I think, has already briefly been mentioned, but yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that when we talk about PPPs, a lot of the time we really sort of try to look at what the ownership model is, etc. But I think I would like to always advocate for the fact that the government should be seeing the private sector, should sort of more broadly give guidelines to the private sector within their policy development work, whether it's NDCs or the national development plans, in terms of what their priorities are, where the private sector could step in by themselves effectively, sort of give the direction. I mean, just to give an example more clearly, so in Burundi, the project that we have financed through REP, the Mubuga Solar IPP, as well as the Mpanda, actually, run-of-river hydro project, both projects were identified as priority projects in the National Development Plan. So we feel that, we are very much supporting the agenda of the government. And in fact, as an investor, I would personally, or we as a team, would look at this as quite an important element from reducing the political risk element. So to understand that what we are supporting is in fact aligned with the government's priorities. And the second area within that, also to stress, and I think Maria has alluded to that already, is that when the regulations, for example, are being designed, we felt sometimes that, so there is an increasing focus on involving the private sector. More often that is developers. And I would just argue for the more inclusion of financiers also earlier on. We did have, as a good practice example, I could bring up Kenya. In Kenya, the government has been designing the new mini-grid regulations. In fact, elections came in a little bit too early, so those have not been signed into law. But we worked quite closely on reviewing the drafts. There was a very strong public consultation process and a more sort of targeted private consultation process. And we have provided some feedback that has been actually taken on board. So the final draft actually looks much better from an investor perspective. We would consider that to be relatively bankable regulations, or definitely a strong improvement from the first draft. And that is really as a result of opening it up, opening the process up in a transparent way and collaborative way, and allowing for us to sort of partner on this level. So yeah, maybe on this positive note, I'd like to see more of that in other markets as well.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Eva. Gabriel, what do you say?
So I can focus on the mini-grid aspect. I think on the demand side, there's no question there's demand. People without power want power. So I think there's almost we've seen the numbers that were presented at the start of the session. So the demand side, I think, is very strong and clear. But mini grids still exist in a place where it's driven by supply side support. So I always give the analogy of it's like solar PV in the early 2000s. It wasn't commercially viable by itself, and the only reason we have a huge industry today is because countries like Germany, Japan, they put in place these long-term support systems, feed-in tariffs, etc., that allowed the solar sector to scale and bring down costs. And so mini grids are in the same place today. If there is not a supply side support system, you will not see mini grids get built. And so I think we're very excited by opportunities in, say, the DRC, where we're seeing a big supply side program coming in from the World Bank, the IFC, AFDB, etc. But you can look at countries like Kenya or Tanzania, where there was a lot of activity when there was good supply side support, and now, at least from the private sector perspective, not much has happened in the last few years. So we're very hopeful that as governments see that mini grids can deliver what their citizens need, that private sector mini grids can be a solution for electrification, we can be a cost-effective partner, that we'll see more of those supply side solutions coming in to other markets across East Africa.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriel. Now for Kenya, what are you doing to stimulate demand for decentralized renewable energy? Because it is very important that the demand is created before you supply the power. At least the demand should be already created. So what is Kenya doing, and which are the demand drivers for decentralized renewable energy?
All right, thank you, Dennis. As you're aware, one of the key presidential drives is mainly in agriculture, where in the rural areas, that is one of the main economic ventures that the people want to venture into. And therefore, there's a great demand there's a great demand in the area of solar water pumping in the rural areas, who basically zero in on agricultural projects. That is one of the key drivers of the presidency. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Now another issue which I want to ask you is about capacity development, especially for professionals, technicians, and maybe engineers, business managers. How is it being handled in Kenya, especially because that determines whether the systems installed will be able to work for a long time. If there is no trained human resource, you find it is a big challenge to ensure that the sustainability of these projects. So, what is Kenya doing in areas of awareness and capacity development for renewable energy?
Thank you so much, Dennis. Currently, I would want to talk about the COSA project that is ongoing in Kenya, which has a funding of 22 million on capacity building. And the government is really working on ensuring that the three main sectors that are dealing with electricity in the country, being the parent Ministry of Energy, REREC, and Kenya Power and Lightning Corporation, that there is training ongoing to be trained. They are trained, then they can go and train the other communities in the rural areas. So I can say that is going on well, and the government is very keen on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Now, Maria, you can also tell us about the key demand drivers for decentralized renewable energy in East Africa, focusing in areas of agriculture, water, fishing, and other applications.
Thank you. On quite general terms, I think affordability is improving, and that improves also demand for the products in general. So that has improved overall the sort of addressable market. and that will continue. I think also more favorable policy regimes will improve affordability. There's certain fiscal incentives that governments can introduce and will have an impact also on affordability. Also, if you think about agricultural sector, I think there's more and more sort of smaller scale solutions coming into the market, which also opens up the sort of customer base to a wider set of farmers that are also for the smallholder sector, let's say. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. For decentralized renewable energy to be successful, we need to focus a lot on productive use of energy. Because if you realize, many of the applications have been for Tier 1 and Tier 2 applications. For lighting and phone charging, and these are the values that we are calculating about access. But to bring a full socio-economic transformation in these countries, it requires that the people, the farmers, the business people are able to use the energy productively. Maybe I can ask Beatrice, what are you doing in Kenya to ensure that there is growth in the productive use of energy, so that people are not only tapping for lighting applications and phone charging, and then we say electricity access has increased. How can we stimulate economic development, production, ensuring that the service sector grows to grow the economy? Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Currently at REREC, we have really been partnering with the county governments. We work with them closely. That's the main partnerships we've been having in Kenya. And through the county governments, we look at their manifestos, and we are able to see the projects that they want to accomplish within their tenure. And as I said in my presentation, we have a fund, we call it the matching fund, where the county governments come in with their funds, and then we match up the exact amount, and we ensure that the electrification of the counties is done according to the manifestation, the manifestos that they have placed in the county and the projects they want to do. We have signed these manifestations with a few counties in Kenya, and I can say it has been very successful, because now they are able also to undertake, the trainings. They train also at the village levels, and they ensure that the capacity building is done.
Yeah, thank you, Beatrice. Thank you, dear panelists. Now we are going to the audience. You can ask your questions to anyone of us. I hope you have understood what we have been saying. Thank you. So the floor is open for questions from the audience. Someone to move the mic? Yeah.
Bonjour, je suis M. Gérard Chouabia, président de l'Association camerounaise pour les énergies renouvelables. Voilà, je pose ma question en français. Je sais que l'Afrique de l'Est c'est anglais, c'est purement anglophone. Et moi je suis francophile. Ceci étant, j'ai suivi avec intérêt, n'est-ce pas, l'intervention de différents panélistes. Et j'ai noté, je pense que je m'adresse à tous, à moins que j'ai mal compris. Je ne vois pas dans votre présentation, je vais dire de manière intrinsèque, le renforcement de capacité, des compétences, le renforcement de capacité ou la compétence, la compétence professionnelle, formation et autres. D'une part, et aussi les normes, C'est-à-dire, est-ce que quand on parle de panneaux solaires, l'investissement dans le panneau solaire, dans les énergies renouvelables, est-ce que vous avez évoqué les normes dans vos présentations, quel que soit le domaine des énergies renouvelables, hein? Voilà, c'est ma question. Et la troisième question que je voudrais indiquer, là c'est toujours à l'Afrique de l'Est, j'ai lu dans les rapports que l'Afrique de l'Est est le parent riche des énergies renouvelables en termes d'investissement. Ça veut dire que c'est là où se focalisent toutes les initiatives, n'est-ce pas, pour le développement des énergies renouvelables en Afrique de l'Est. Je voulais comprendre pourquoi. Et est-ce que c'est parce que le secteur est réglementé par rapport aux autres par rapport aux autres parties de l'Afrique? Voilà, c'est ce que je voulais savoir. Voilà mes 3 grandes questions. Merci.
I think I can answer so that we don't forget the questions. You talked about issues of standards. In the East African market, basically the standards bodies have standards for renewable energy products and also energy efficiency products. And these standards are being implemented. Of course, not to the best, but at least the standards are there and others are being developed. On the area of capacity building, the presentation was just brief to give a snapshot of what is happening in the region, but there is a lot of capacity development ongoing in renewable energy space. There are different, first of all, governments are doing capacity building and awareness. Development partners are also doing the same, and the private sector and also other civil society organizations. So there are trainings, capacity development happening in the region. The level of how it is happening, it is not the same. For example, in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, it may be ahead a little, then Tanzania, then others also coming. So things are happening, and also because of the East African Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, it is bringing now harmonization of policies, for example, in the region, harmonization of standards. I can say we have the regional minimum energy performance standards which were adopted last year. They are also soon for cooling appliances, refrigerators, and air conditioners will also come in. And then there's also ongoing work on the development of the EAC regional energy efficiency policy. So we are trying also to see that we bring countries together to move together in the areas of renewable energy and energy efficiency. And also about the success of the East African community on decentralized renewable energy is because regulation. There are rural electrification agencies, there are regulation agencies in each of the countries almost. And these ones are able to give the process of getting a license. For example, how do you get a license for setting up a mini grid or setting up a power plant? So I think the issue comes in from the policy environment. So there are a number of policies which were developed that have facilitated investment from investors in the area of the renewable energy and energy efficiency. So I think the market environment and also the demand. In the presentation, you saw I was showing the access rates. They were very low. They have improved because of off-grid and mini-grid solutions. Thank you.
Yes. Mr. Dennis, thank you so much. I'm Charles from Uganda, and I'm happy to hear from the panelists about this subject matter. I have about 3 concerns. I happen to work with an energy cooperative society called Chegegwa. We are into grid management and some off-grid. I have one concern about to Gabriel, Lev, and Major. You've been presenting and talking about work with the developers. I wanted to know whether you have also an opportunity to work with the utility service providers in your programs. Two, I wish to know from you your experience in terms of what you found favorable within the concessions. What factors do you find favorable for you to work with the developers within their concessions that we need to leverage on, some of us? And I think this goes to Dennis and the entire team. I find myself a bit puzzled, but very happy about it when we talk about the access agenda, almost globally. But alongside, especially in the sub-Saharan Africa, where we have limited capacities of the technical people to support some of these renewables, there comes along a challenge about the e-wastes. What could be some of the initiatives that probably ECRI or any other player here you have in regard to managing the e-waste that get along as we happen to promote the access agenda, but we see a lot. So many panels, so many batteries, so many things are just left down there, and another problem is coming of in terms of sustainability of these initiatives from the mini grid and the rest of the technologies. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. I can start. Under the ERA project, which is funded by SIDA, implemented by UNIDO, IACRI, and SACRI, under the project, there is e-waste management. And what we are beginning with is conducting a study of e-waste management in East Africa and Southern Africa. And then see which interventions can be done after the study. E-waste is a very big problem, and we need to look at it. All the key stakeholders need to work together to ensure that these wastes are recycled and they are not disposed into our landfills. At the moment, the e-waste and organic waste is being mixed in many of our countries. So we need to do much more to ensure that we collect this waste and dispose it properly, and also we recycle it. It's a big problem. It is for solar products. It is also for televisions, radios, and other electronic products. So I hand over to the rest of my colleagues.
Great. So I think I can take the first question. So yes, we are interested to work with utilities. We're actually looking at there's regulation in markets like Nigeria where it allows for interconnected mini grids. So we're looking at opportunities there. I think we're interested to look at it partly because the market opportunity is very large, but also I think it's very important for us, the more the mini grid sector can show that we can solve problems for governments, we can solve problems for their citizens, for their voters, the more support we'll get. And the reason why I think that's so critical is I think mini grids are in this bucket that is considered separate to a lot of other infrastructure projects. But if you think of the big risks that a mini grid has, we have tariff risk, we have consumption risk, we have FX risk. Every utility in Africa has those same risks, but they raise a lot of funding. I'm not saying those are necessarily good businesses. I'm just saying that the risks that are often seen as mini grid risks are just utility risks. And the big difference between why are there huge main grid public utility companies is because they have government support, because they are solving problems for their governments. They are connecting their voters and their citizens to power. And so that's why I think it's beyond just the market opportunity. I think it's really important if we can show as a sector that we can solve some of these problems, we will get that government support that I don't think we have. As a sector, we failed to convince some governments in some markets that we are that solution provider.
Thanks. I agree with what Gabriel has said. In the case of REP facility, it's part of the mandate of REP to support majority private sector owned or led projects. But there is a possibility for collaboration there, including on the business models that Gabriel has talked about. So bankability of concession contracts and maybe more broadly also regulations as well, so because it depends in each country, sort of what the regulatory framework is. So the key aspects, and actually more broadly policy as well, so the key aspects are primarily, so I like to call it transparency and predictability is what matters for investors. So what we want to see is, for example, whether there is a national electrification strategy, and we can predict, where the grid what is allocated to the grid extension versus where the space, where the government sees space for mini grids. And so having that clarity provides us with more certainty that there will be perhaps, lesser likelihood of gridding, what we call grid encroachment, within the sort of within the time frame of the project financing, for example. So this is quite important. And then related to that also, so within either concession contract or regulations, provisions for what would happen if the national grid arrives at the mini grid site. What are the options for the developer and the utility to work together or separately? And then in the case that the mini grid, for example, or part of it is being removed or is being handed over, what would be the compensation mechanisms, how that would be calculated, how that would work. Of course, cost-reflective tariff is probably the most challenging aspect at the moment. Well, it naturally would be. I think we're kind of moving away from saying that it is cost-reflective. Of course, for funders, we need to ensure that we get our financing back with a reasonable return. But in the end, what tariff is being charged to the customers is actually a combination of what the project costs are and also whether, what the government sees as an acceptable tariff. And then if they think that the tariff should be reduced, then there's a possibility to work with concessional funding providers or grant providers, so viability gap funding providers who can perhaps bridge that gap. And yeah, within the concession contract, so sort of more broadly, enforceability of contracts is quite important for us. And maybe just back to the question of West versus East Africa, I think what Dennis has stressed was, I agree with that as well in terms of the fact that some of the regulatory frameworks perhaps were more sort of advanced earlier on in East Africa. For us, we have with REP and with Spark as well, we are looking at both East, West Africa and Southern Africa. In West Africa, we have, perhaps we have invested in West Africa for sure, in Sierra Leone, in Nigeria, in Liberia, perhaps less to date in Francophone countries. That is sort of, for us personally, it's a combination of the fact that we're focusing on smaller scale. I think some of the governments had a priority for larger scale utility projects. Also perhaps sort of the business model, as I said, we are primarily financing private sector led renewable energy development. But also, on the regulatory front, for example, in Ghana, there was a ban on, or a moratorium on PPAs, which has slowed down our project development significantly. So we're seeing some positive movement there, and that's quite exciting. And generally on a more positive note, I think many Francophone countries in West Africa as well are sort of catching up in a way. And we're looking at a number of countries and opportunities there and seeing quite excitedly what's happening. And a lot of more political will, I would say, is also quite interesting to see, including in Niger and some other countries. So there's, hopefully we'll also make many more investments in the coming years in West Africa as well.
There's a little addition I want to make to the question about the utility companies. So what we have seen as turbulent as a challenge, I want to say, as utility company often going through public tenders, about 80% of the tenders I read in a week is solar. I think 90% of the technology companies present here today are solar, not including the data platforms, I would say, or more of the IT technology companies. So often we just cannot respond to the tenders as they're either targeting hydropower, which is traditional dams of 100, 200 megawatts, or it's solar. So what I believe is, I think as utility companies, they should actually also broaden their horizon a bit in terms of acceptance of different technologies, but also looking at smaller scale technologies, as that is what I believe could bridge the gap of the underserved or the not well served communities today. So yeah, I would say, and also I think the beauty of renewables is when we can combine different sources of energy and not necessarily only target one source of energy. So that would be my message to the utility companies in the room.
Yeah, thank you. So basically, only one question and then we finalize. In front.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Salu Hamidin from Rural Education Agency of the Niger Republic, West Africa. My question will go to, first let me thank you all for this wonderful presentation of the panelists and the presentation that were made. Specifically, I want to ask Beatrice on what is the interrelationship between the utility company, the electric utility company, the Rural Education Authority, and the Rural Education Authority and the mini-grid developers in terms of policy as regard to rural education access. Because I've noticed that with the reforms that were done, we can see significant increase or improvement in terms of electricity access, and I want to know the secret behind it. Thank you.
Yeah, he was asking about the relationship between the rural education and the renewable energy corporation, and then with the utility and also the ministry. So basically your institution, energy institutions, how are they working together?
Thank you so much. The Ministry of Energy is our parent ministry. Therefore, under it we have different public, now the public parastatals, REREC being one of them, each with its own different mandate. And we also work very closely with the Kenya Power and Lightning Corporation in Kenya, where our work, when it comes like to mini grids or line installations, we undertake the process of the installation, of course, with the private partners, and then we hand it over to the Kenya Power now to proceed with the work of O&M, operation and maintenance, and of course the collection of the revenue. But we are all under the apparent Ministry of Energy in Kenya, where we have several other parastatals. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Beatrice. Thank you, dear panelists. Thank you, the audience, for listening to us. We have come to the end of our session, and we would like that you get in touch with us after this meeting, and we continue getting in touch. There are many opportunities in East Africa. Thank you very much.
Time goes quickly, so we are late today. I would like to introduce you, it's my pleasure to introduce you NG for the industry announcement.
This is to change the slide, right? Okay, fine. Okay, perfect. Is it how do I do this? Yes. Okay. Okay, thank you. Ok. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Merci d'être venus si nombreux, et surtout d'être restés jusqu'à présent. So for this announcement, I will be speaking in English. My name is Mathieu Brun. I work for NG Energy Access, and today I am very pleased to make an announcement around a landmark partnership that we have recently signed on issuing and selling carbon credits to accelerate the financing to the access to energy industry. So, essentially what I would like to introduce you today is the scope and the content of this agreement and how it can actually benefit for the entire sector. With essentially this first slide, I would like to explain to you as to why we investigated this option and in the end signed this partnership. So to begin with, what is carbon funding, starting with the basics? Carbon funding is essentially a financial instrument to try to incentivize and accelerate the implementation of clean energy projects. This instrument was set in place in order to make sure we can finance and achieve our global climate ambition. The way that it works is essentially clean energy projects manage to validate and certify the amount of greenhouse gas emission they avoid and sell it afterwards to companies who might be emitting CO2 emissions. So why then are we doing this as NG Energy Access? It's simply because of the quite sizable capital available in this market. The voluntary carbon market in 2021 was already $2 billion US. The recently announced African Carbon Market Initiative actually targets that it wants to mobilize $6 billion by 2030 to finance clean energy projects on the African continent. So how are we doing this? And I will go into the details of it. We are essentially partnering with a new standard called Carbon Clear, and this is the innovative aspect of this project, to certify the credits. And then afterwards, when it comes to selling the carbon credit and valorizing them, we are partnering with another entity of NG called NG GEMS. So how does essentially the agreement and the partnership looks like? The way it works is, on one side, as I was mentioning, you have a project avoiding or capturing CO2. In that case, it is our company, NG Energy Access. By selling solar home system, we avoid our customers to purchase polluting sources such as kerosene lamps or diesel generator. And this CO2 avoided has a value and can be purchased, as you can see on the right, by any organization which is wishing to offset its own emissions. We are then partnering with, as I was saying, Carbon Clear, who is the validating entity which certifies under an internationally agreed methodology that there has indeed been some CO2 emission avoided, certifies it, and then holds a registry to ensure the integrity afterwards of the carbon credit. In order to make the connections between our operations and potential buyers, we have our partners NG GEMS, who are making the intermediation to try to market and identify organizations wishing to both offset their own emission, but at the same time have a social impact, and that social impact that we can provide as an access to energy company. On this slide, I essentially want to stress how innovative and how disruptive this partnership can be for the solar energy in the access to energy industry. Essentially, we already have some experience under traditional standards, which are characterized by long lead time, long processes, which can be justified under the argument of integrity, but nowadays they do not enough take into account the particularly highly digitized aspects of our industry. As you're all familiar with the pay-go business model, we have access to a tremendous amount of data on our customers as to when they use their systems and how they use it. And essentially the innovativeness of this partnership is that by working with Carbon Clear, we are relying on this data in order to certify the carbon credit. And what does it look like in the end? when usually you would have more than 1 year in order to register a project or a company to issue carbon credits. Now it's only 1 or 2 months only. When you have to wait at least a year in order to be able to issue the carbon credits, with Carbon Clear, it is done on a weekly basis. For companies like us, which are a bit bigger in the sector, it's obviously extremely interesting in terms of saving per transaction cost. But also for small and medium enterprises, there is a lot of benefit in the sense that they can register free of charge. It's extremely simple to handle, and for that it could definitely help them access to this voluntary carbon market to push and accelerate their development. So I'll just finish very quickly, I know everyone is hungry, with one last slide on essentially the outlook and what could be really the impact of such a project. Again, I'm making a reference to the African Carbon Market Initiative, which has quite ambitious targets where they would like to retire by 2030 300 million tons of carbon credits. They would like, again, I'm making a reference to the figure of $6 billion mobilized to finance clean energy projects in Africa. And right now, when you look at the situation, at least as far as our access to energy, solar sector is concerned, we're issuing quite a minor volume of it, and it's mobilizing extremely low volumes of capital compared to what it could. I'm using, you see on the right of the slide, the potential share of the sector. Essentially, those figures are based and calculated as to what the sector could have given in 2021 if every single solar home system company were actually using and issuing carbon credits and selling them. So you see it's a tremendous amount of capital, again, free capital to push and accelerate your business that could be mobilized thanks to this new solution. So today, we are among the biggest players to sign an agreement with Carbon Clear and start issuing credits under their standard. But we are extremely hopeful that other players should be interested by such a mechanism and join us in order to issue and make it one of the standard methodology to issue the carbon credits for solar home system. So this is the announcement I wanted to make. I'll still be around for the rest of the day for other companies who would be interested to use this methodology or other any interested stakeholder who would like to discuss it. I am at your availability. So now, thank you very much for your attention et bon appétit tout le monde. Are we taking questions as well or not necessarily for the announcement? No? Okay, well, thank you very much. Merci tout le monde.
Thank you very much for your attention. I think you are probably hungry, so I invite you to go to the restaurant for your lunch. Enjoy your lunch, and we will be back here around 2 p.m. with the same topics, public-private dialogue, but with Central and Southern Africa. And in the same time, I think we have this meeting with Desert2Power at the first floor. Thank you very much, and enjoy your lunch. Bon appétit.